I was looking around waiting to speak, and you're at a women's event when there's tissue boxes everywhere. And this is really welcome to me as I'm pregnant. I could just cry at any moment, So, so anyway, I'm very, very glad to be here with you. And I wanted to say one tiny brief thing about this gathering, which is kind of to those who say that things don't get better in society. I think you should look around, right? When I went through college and in my first few years as a professional woman and graduate student, there was nothing like this, right? What you're engaged in now. And when I think back, I think I would have gladly carried water to be involved in something like this. We're kind of just, there were a few of us that we kind of knew, like, well, there are people who love Jesus and to make a difference in a feminine way, but I didn't know very many of them. So this is wonderful. And so I think take the fact of your being together as a special sign of your blessings and opportunities to build on a little bit of progress in the culture. Okay, so I've been asked to speak about being entrusted with the economy. So I want to say this at the outset. From the perspective of women, this is a pretty interesting area to tackle for a couple of reasons. The first is that women don't study very much economics. So this is something I'll explain a little bit more about. But women do tend to care a lot about social issues and social policy, and most of you in this room probably do. And these things tend to get worked out in the political and economic arena. So there's a little bit of a tension. You may sort of be sensing what I'm hinting at. I'll draw this out in a minute, between kind of preparation for dealing with some of these issues and kind of women's natural, I don't know, you said disinterest in economics. So I'll draw this out in sort of the first part. And this second reason, this is a funny issue or area to tackle, and I'm going to say this at the risk of throwing my topic itself, the title, under the bus, which is that, as I'll describe in a bit, it's really not clear, least of all to economists, what it means to be entrusted with the economy, since the economy itself and sort of economic issues even are not things that are easy to measure. They're not things that are easy to define or even to understand. So if you tell me I've been entrusted with the care of this child, I know exactly what that means. Then there's some refinement we have to work on, right? And maybe I'm insensitive to certain aspects of the child's well-being. But when we say we're to be entrusted with economic issues, it's not very clear always what that means. So I will mention that in a minute. So this point about the economy and women. So here's just an example. The fraction of women in full-time MBA programs over the last 4 years has ranged from only 32% to 36%. So, so roughly 2/3 of full-time MBA students are men. And I'm going to sort of assume this is sort of a reflection of a general preference or interest. There's been very little obstacle to women getting into these programs. As a matter of fact, regarding doctorates in economics, women earned only 34% of economics doctorates in the year 2011. So this sounds like a lot, like 34%. You might think, wow, this is progress, this is great, a third. But when you consider the fact that 46% of all doctorates in any area are earned by women, this is actually kind of the smallest share among all the social sciences. So in psychology and sociology, women earn the vast majority of doctorates. So this isn't an issue like women don't do doctorates. Last time I checked, although I haven't checked recently, I think women got more doctorates or a larger percentage in mathematics and chemistry than in economics. So it's hard really to start. You probably all know this, that the amount of disinterest that most women have in what they think of as economics is pretty substantial. So I was going to ask you, how many of you did any major coursework in economics in college? It's probably, yeah. So looking at the hands is less than a third in this room, and you guys are the few in the crowd. I almost wanted to ask, how many of you took at least one class in economics? I'm still not even sure we could get up to 30%. Okay, we're getting closer. Okay, so this is good. So this is another reason why it's difficult. But then I said, and this is a tension, that women tend to be intensely interested in, ambitious about sort of social issues and social matters that seem to be related to policy, right? So, for example, we would think about sort of the general social questions like how we deal with the poor, the disadvantaged, the most vulnerable, unborn, sort of marriage and family policy, if I had a nickel for every time I'm asked as an economist, well, aren't you like really passionate about sort of family policies and getting family-friendly policies in place? And I just scratch my head. I'm like, no. Do you know how tough that is? Do you know what that means? It's not so easy. So here's what I wanted to say. I wanted to ask a topic that's been on the table recently. Is the subject of generous maternity leave policies, and I'm expecting, but so most women I know, in a variety of religious and cultural backgrounds, tend to consider themselves broadly supportive of more generous maternity leave policies, for example. Or another example, just to pick one that's a little further, is increases in wages for teachers. So it's very common to people say, look, it's really wrong that we don't pay teachers more, right? We should pay teachers more. We should sign that we value them more. Things might work out better, this sort of thing. But for both of these issues, they're kind of what we would call economic dynamics at work behind them that make them much more difficult to kind of dictate or to achieve than we think. So, for example, on generous maternity leave policies, generous, I mean, like very lengthy, when they're imposed on businesses, it can, not in every case, they can make managers and owners look for sneaky ways of not hiring women. Because you've just made the price of hiring a woman much more expensive. So is that a thing that you want to play around with? Now, it might be, and there might be good reasons to do it, but you rarely hear people talk about sort of the flip side, what can happen when this happens. So think about pay for teachers. So this is sort of another one I think is interesting. Wages are kind of price, and the price of things, in a sense, doesn't reveal the value per se. People say, well, if we paid teachers more, we pay them so little, it says that we don't value them enough, and that's actually not what it says at all. In fact, some of the most valuable things, right, that people do, that they don't get paid for at all, so this isn't right. But they're basically, prices tend to reveal the value of things with respect to scarcity or relative scarcity. The reason we pay teachers less than we pay engineers is because there's a lot more people available to teach than to be engineers. Now, there are ways of thinking about this, when we think about these underlying realities, but why are there so many more people willing to teach than to be engineers? So a couple of things come to mind, and you could do this exercise. So engineers have to have a very high aptitude for math, right? By nature, kind of if we just look at sort of aptitudes for math, by nature, this is relatively scarce. Like having the ability to do 3 or 4 semesters of calculus in college, this is relatively scarce. And then even if we could improve this, even if we said, let's just institute math education from the time of 6 months old and really we're going to change everything, right? Even if we could improve this, it's not clear that women in general enjoy this kind of work as much. So it seems that there's kind of natural tastes and preferences. And something that it's more difficult to, so not everyone enjoys that kind of intense analytical work, even if they have the aptitude for it. So we just have fewer engineers. And then it takes more years to become an engineer. It takes, currently, and we could discuss whether this is a good idea, it takes many more courses to train to become an engineer than to become a teacher. So essentially the price or the expected wage has to be factored in when we think about how long it takes someone to study to become an engineer. So this is kind of long reasoning I'm kind of going through. We know we have lots of evidence, as depressing as it is, that expected salaries influence students' choice of a field tremendously. Not for women as much, actually, but so this is it. So maternity leave policies are sort of similar. I'll go back to that. That this generous policy actually raises the price of hiring a woman in a fairly dramatic way. So we can think of lots of problems with this, but let me raise just one, as someone who's had several children. Maternity leave policies raise the price of hiring one particular kind of woman, right? Which particular kind of women? Women who want to have children. So for especially sort of pro-family persons to be advocating for maternity leave policies, they should really stop and think a little harder, because you actually create grounds for discrimination, particularly against religious women or women who want to have a lot of children. You can. You don't in every industry, but it's a general principle. So employers under a mandated maternity leave policy who could not by law, they can't by law say, are you planning to have a child in the next 6 months? They can't ask that question. But they might look for trickier ways to try to figure out what kind of a woman they're looking at in the application process. So they might think, gee, like Catholics and Mormons, they have a lot of kids. Right? Now, you can't ask that either, like, are you a practicing Catholic? Are you a practicing Mormon? Whatever that means. But you could look at someone's CV and suppose they're a graduate of this institution. Well, that's a pretty good guess that maybe this person is a Catholic, right? And we know that other institutions where people get their degrees mark them out similarly. So you start to think about the implications. And this is just one example. I'm picking out one tiny example of a place where women care a lot about the social question at hand, which is an important one. How do we make the economy, the workplace, society more friendly to women who have children? That women shouldn't be penalized, say, for having children unduly, right? But there's this other problem, which is that kind of getting from A to B requires thinking through a lot of dynamics that we are not, because of our native lack of interest in economics, we're not necessarily used to thinking through. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. I could give you we could spend all afternoon going through examples of ways in which particular policy goals can't be achieved in the way that you think you could achieve them. So what I want to say here is that we should, and one of my heroes, Edith Stein, did, for example, hold these kind of general views about what a just society would look like, where we say, well, women shouldn't be penalized for having children. It should be possible for the poor to find meaningful work, right? It should be possible. And so this is a true thing. But how we do this is something that's fairly difficult. Okay, so this is the first thing. So I want to reformulate this tension, which is that women tend to be less interested in economics. Now, I think when I say women are less interested natively in economics, often this is because they don't understand what the study of economics really means. So they think it's kind of studying money and interest rates and things like that. But as a matter of fact, it's a lot more interesting than that, because as I just discussed, everything I just described about how employers might respond to maternity leave, like, this is all economics, right? But it didn't sound like, discussion of money or interest rates. So in fact, it's probably just, part of it is probably just a misnomer. It's intensely interesting, and it's completely about people, right? It's all about people, which women are really excited about people. So here's so I think there's kind of two correctives that I wanted to bring myself around to before finishing. There's kind of two correctives that I think might be helpful for thinking about how we could be better stewards or caretakers of economic issues. And so the first one is probably the obvious one at this point, which is regardless of your natural affinity for economic thinking and how much you studied in college, to read a little bit more widely about basic economics. So because it isn't this thing, it's this thing that we might call, I like to think of it as one of the branches of the science of man, right? Or science of men and women, right? The science of persons. Just as theology is the science of God. So we sloppily use the language social science, but what we mean about the social sciences is that it's a place where we study in an analytical way what it means to be a person and a social animal, right? So to read more widely, and to kind of think about what's under, so it's actually not, you won't read a lot about prices, for example, if you read good works in economics, but you read more about things like scarcity and two sides of transactions, the role of something we call private information, right? Like I might have I have private information about things that determine my choices, and it's very difficult for other people to learn this information, but this information is incredibly important to have. So there's all these things really very, very interesting. So I have a few books to suggest, which I'll just share with one of the organizers, so you could maybe email them around. So I kind of want to encourage you to do that. Now, the second corrective, I think, takes us back to the reason I said that this is a difficult topic, which is that it's not clear what it means to be entrusted with the economy, when I've just said it's incredibly difficult to ordain outcomes. We say we want to have a society in which teachers are valued, or expectant mothers are valued, or these kinds of things. We can't ordain outcomes through social policy typically in the way we think we can. So briefly, I have a couple of thoughts on this. And what I want to say here, it may be a little bit counterintuitive, but I have in mind a comment that John Paul II made in Centesimus Annus. So John Paul said, there's sort of nothing wrong with economic values per se. And the word value is a funny word, so it's not entirely, we could even say economic goods. We could say the things which because and when I say economic goods now, I don't mean things we buy and sell. I mean the conditions for kind of the flourishing of trade and production, which are critically important for human society. So John Paul II said there's nothing wrong with having a robust and sort of healthy sense of what economic goods are, economic values. The problem arises when economic values or economic goods are the only shared values in society. They're the only things that we actually can agree on. Right? Oh, we all agree that like a higher GDP is really good. That's just very important. We all agree that trade of a certain kind is very important. I mean, so this is the only thing you can agree on. So he said, now if you, I think if you were to do a really quick survey of the sort of political disasters we're in the middle of, to say that economic values are the only shared values is almost the best way of summing it up. Now, even on those matters, we have fairly serious disagreements about how to achieve these economic values, right? Which tend to fall loosely into sort of political camps. Republicans and Democrats is very loose, but they are sort of the only things we're deliberating about socially. We have sort of given up the idea we're going to agree about anything spiritual, certainly anything religious, family-oriented, family. So John Paul II warned that without the shared values of things that are higher than economic goods, that we risk losing even these lower things, right? The things like the economic values we had in the first place. And so we could lose these in this sort of process of dehumanization. So then I think, what is the feminine role here? And this is the counter intuition, right? Which is, I'm going to submit that it's sort of two things. First, that since receptivity to the person is this fundamental gift of women, it's natural then for women to provide a special kind of testimony or witness to other values that are not the shared sort of material values of the economy or public life, and so to those goods which are constituted by persons, so family, and the divine persons, so spiritual realities. And so in this way, by giving this kind of special witness, even if you're not interested in becoming an economist, can actually help preserve the lower goods, which depend upon our shared sense of the higher goods, right? So I think this is kind of important. And on this, I would refer you back briefly, if you haven't had a chance to see it recently, to Edith Stein's essay on the ethos of women's professions, where she talks about this kind of feminine corrective that women can bring to the marketplace. The second suggestion I have here, which might also sound a little bit odd, is actually to spend some time, I said in the first section, to spend some time reading about basic economics. And I'll send you a few good books. And the books I'll send you are not boring, I promise you. But the second thing is actually, this is going to sound funny to you probably, is actually to read, I have two things. First is to read widely from actually business management and entrepreneurship books. So when you were like, where are these books? These are the books that are always, they're always sort of under the Harvard Business Review in the corner of the bookcase in the airport, for example. You could find them if you go on Amazon. But what you'll find if you read all these, like Good to Great and The Advantage and these sorts of things, this isn't even my field. This isn't economics at all. This is sort of business greatness or something like that, management. You'll find in these things over and over the kind of rediscovery by these authors, the rediscovery of the priority of persons over things, over structures, over rules. These guys say, actually, when it comes down to it at the end of the day, the value of your corporation is really the value of the team that you've built and the value of the relationships and the communication. This is an area of feminine genius, right? So this is a very interesting thing. We don't tend to think about women as especially genius as regards business, but I could give a separate talk on that. It's actually there's a lot of truth in this. But if you read these things, it'll be kind of a boost to your own sense of wait, I can do this. I could build a team in this way. I can see what's going on here, right? So this is the first part of this. And the second, I think, in this area of kind of bringing this other testimony to the higher things, so as to preserve the lower things, which, it's important that we can eat and work, right? These are not sort of so lower that we don't care about them, right? The second thing is to read widely from the lives of religious sisters, especially in this country, and especially foundresses of things, which you'll find, I'm a great devotion to Elizabeth Seton. Also, if you haven't read the biography of Mother Angelica, we can go away from this country and think about St. Teresa of Avila and some of the religious sisters who founded things. These women, because they're kind of working outside of what we typically think of, most of you, I assume, are lay women, they exemplify these particular characteristics of the way women tend to bring this feminine genius to this kind of witness, especially in the building of institutions and public institutions, schools, churches, hospitals, and in other cases, community organizations. So kind of it's hard to work this way if you don't have these fresh models. So I kind of would encourage you to go back to, maybe your childhood and get the adult versions of those biographies that maybe you read as a kid. I'm always trying to do this. And I think this will help a lot. And strange as it sounds, I think this can have a tremendous effect on the preserving and the care for economic issues and values in this country. Thank you.